State of Israel is born out of the European anti-Semitic context, meaning the World Zionist Organization, Herzl and his conferences that occurred in Europe, responding to anti-Semitism and the pogroms, covering the Dreyfus affair in France. It gave grounding for responding to European anti-Semitism and forming the way forward by leaving Europe. This means that Zionism as a movement was not born among the Jewish population that lived and continued to live with Muslims, with Palestinians, with Arabs for almost 1400 years, both as co-participants in the broader notion of what we call Islamic civilization. And we had some of the oldest Jewish communities. So important to know and to remember that Zionism was not born among the Jews in Iraq, the Jews in Syria, the Jews in Yemen, in Morocco, Tunisia, Egypt, or any other part, including Iran, that had substantial and sizable Jewish population that coexisted, co-lived, co-participated as neighbors and participant in the broader sense of what we call Arab and Islamic civilization in general. So that's an important point to actually contextualize what is taking place. Third, speaking about Palestinians exist under a multiple types of structures and jurisdictions. Currently, the IDF and the Israeli government and all its allies are reducing Palestinians and Palestine to Hamas. Hamas is Palestinians, which gives us the sense of erasure of what is taking place. And we could pose the question, if Hamas is the problem, then what is taking place in the West Bank? Why is the West Bank population being assaulted simultaneously? Why is it that since the beginning of this year, 435 Palestinians have been gunned down, almost 2 to 4 per day on a daily basis, nonstop? Why is it that Ben-Gvir, the internal security minister, been given his own independent security force without having to be reviewed by the prime minister office or the existing security infrastructure to actually run shot of the Palestinians inside the West Bank, taking over land, attacking towns and cities, especially a number of pogroms, including Hawara, which was, just almost about five weeks ago that this takes place. And more importantly, speaking about the larger context of Palestinians living under apartheid inside 1948, subject to 65 discriminatory laws that differentiate on the basis of ethno-religious identity, where many elements in the normal life of a citizen is not actually allowed for Palestinians. I say this because, again, this divide and rule, this reductionist approach, this knee-jerk reaction that the Palestinians have to constantly be put to answer the question, a yes and no question, and to fail to recognize the broader lens that the Palestinians face the last settler colonial project to be commissioned by the Western world and to be implanted in Palestine to deal with the Jewish question in Europe, but also to create a stranglehold structure over the areas that were part of the Ottoman Empire, but also part of the aspirations of creating a unified Arab world in there. So that's a very important understanding that we need to ground ourselves. Another element, which is for me the fourth element, is the Western world constantly say Israel has the right to defend itself. And that question has to be deconstructed because implied in that statement, Palestinians do not have the right to defend themselves, nor that have the right to safety and security in their own home and land. Because that statement is articulated whether it's in the West Bank, Gaza Strip, or anywhere where Palestinians, including Palestinians in Lebanon, who've been assaulted by Israel time and time again, or Palestinians that have been assassinated in Europe and across the Middle East. We need to actually reframe the questions that Palestinians have the right to defend themselves, Palestinians have the right to freedom, Palestinians have the right to dignity, and more importantly, since we're speaking about Gaza and now it's the attempt to another forceful, you could say another forceful Nakba, demanding of 1.1 million, possibly 2.3 million to leave Gaza. These are 90% of Gaza population are refugees that were made refugees in 1948 in this sense. So Palestinians have the right of return. So Palestinians have the right of return to their villages, to their towns, to their orchards, to their lemon trees, to their fig olive trees, and they still have the keys to their homes opposite not only Western Zionists that brought in Russian Zionists, but continued immigration to supplant the indigenous population. Now, I understand Israeli PR people don't want to talk about the indigenous people right. They don't want to refer to the Palestinians, and they want to actually turn the discussion that they're the indigenous people, which is actually one of the most, if it's a comedy, I could understand it, but it's one of the most comical things. A colonial population that takes over an indigenous population, calls itself indigenous, and actually casts aspirations at the population that was there, which is the Palestinian. So in this sense, we need to actually say that the Palestinians have a right, a fundamental right, protected by international law, protected by the United Nations Charter, and protected by every principle that covers the basic conduct of the rights of population, including the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Now, let me step back and say the following. Israel is committing acts of genocide on the Palestinians today. We could speak about acts of genocide from 1948. We could speak about acts of genocide since by trying to disrupt and harm and aspects of Palestinian life continuously. But as we speak today in Gaza, Israel is committing war crimes and also committing genocide. War crimes in the following. Cutting off water from a civilian population is a war crime. Cutting off food from being supplied to an occupied population is a war crime. Cutting electricity from the critical infrastructure, hospitals, so on, by Israel is a war crime. Targeting apartment buildings where civilians are located intentionally in carpet bombing is a war crime. We could add to this the fact that Israel is also attacking the escape routes after calling on people to leave, actually bombing them as they are leaving, and also today bombing the Rafah crosspoint to prevent the access to supplies to come in and out. So that's, all these are war crimes. I'm going to get a little bit further on this. Gaza Strip, all the population in Gaza Strip is designated as internationally dependent people. That's a classification for a population that does not have citizenship. Palestinians in the Gaza Strip don't have a citizenship. They don't carry a passport. They don't have a citizenship. They're not Egyptians. They're not even, Palestinian Authority did not extend its citizenship on the Palestinians. So the Gaza population are internationally dependent people, meaning they are subject to the protection of both the United Nations and the international community as is constituted. So the Security Council, the permanent members, security members, are actually responsible for the well-being of the population. Israel, as an occupying power under the 4th Geneva Convention, is responsible for the well-being of the population in Gaza. If they want to conduct a warfare with a guerrilla force, there again, international law, I'm speaking from international law permits states to actually pursue guerrilla fighters or an enemy that they consider to have what you call a military confrontation. International law is very clear, but it does not allow Israel as a state that is admitted into the United Nations, recognizing the Charter, a signatory to the 4th Geneva Convention, to actually pursue and bomb and kill and maim civilian population under the dubious claim that it has the right to defend itself. You are not defending yourself if you wipe out a whole family, right? 371 families have been subject to massacre in the bombing in Gaza. The 371 families, the smallest losing 3 members, and the Shihab family, the Dalu family. The Shihab family lost 44 members. Just let me be very clear. All the family roster of members were wiped out, meaning that there isn't a Shihab family left in Gaza because of this bombing. And no matter what claim, what is said about Israel having the right to defend itself, Israel does not have a right to commit genocide. Israel does not have a right to commit war crime. So that has to be clear when what is the status of Gaza population? It's internationally dependent population that have the international community should protect them. More so, the 4 Geneva Convention obligate the occupying power to provide the needs of the civilian population. Again, we set aside Hamas to the side. If you want to engage with Hamas, you want to pursue them, again, they're a fighting force, a guerrilla force, and you are a military, an organized military. There's a set of rules for Geneva Convention passed and adopted after the Second World War, right? So again, the Zionists and the state of Israel, in terms of their language, they actually are speaking about war crimes as they speak. And more importantly, the so-called international community, and I don't want to entertain you with a laugh, I laugh a lot on that, but the international community who is inciting for genocide against the Palestinians, both inside Palestine and Gaza, but increasingly also where we are at. The fact that our beloved child Wadia and his mother stabbed 26 times by the 71 years old. This is the responsibility. I put the responsibility at the desk of Joe Biden. Joe Biden, when you stood up there in the White House from the pulpit and you claimed that actually babies been decapitated and that you saw a picture of it, basically you signed the death warrant for Wadia. When the media actually says that they have reported on babies being decapitated and being killed, you actually, as a media, amplified and acted as the executioner for Wadia. So we have to understand the dynamics that made it possible for a 7-year-old man who just a few days or few weeks back actually built a tree house for Wadia, turns with a knife, trying to choke the mother, stab the mother, and stab the Wadia at 26. That is the responsibility of the media. That is the responsibility of the political, and I don't call it leadership, the cowardly political leadership in this country that abuses Muslims time and time again. And they want to actually continue to have surveillance, to continue to have targeting of the Muslim community. And I think we need to actually both wise up and have a backbone that says that it is not sufficient, nor is acceptable for us for you to show up every 2 years or every 4 years to get our vote. It's not sufficient for you to actually come and praise our food or say Assalamu alaikum in completely decrepit Arabic. And you think you could actually take a picture and run out and then go to visit Israel and pay allegiance and say more weapons for Israel. Those days are over. Either you stand and you clearly say where you stand on Palestine, where you stand on freedom, where you stand on the dignity of people, where you stand, you oppose the authorizing incitement, you oppose the murder of people from the sky, you oppose sending weapons to Israel, you call for end for military aid and any type of aid, including stopping police cooperations in our city being trained by Israeli forces. Unless you do this as a politician, we care less. We could live without having you come and eat a hummus falafel and get out of our place. Those days we have to say, as dignified Muslim community in this country, that this is part of our priority. And this is not undermining or not speaking about other issues. I speak about the Hindutva, I speak about Black Lives Matter, and they are issues that we have to be there. We speak about the education, the transformation, public housing. So we could both speak about Palestine forcefully, and we could speak about all these issues to have an agenda that represents the highest dignity for our community. I'm reminded that people want to celebrate Malcolm X, but without actually looking at what Malcolm X stood for or what Malcolm X actually advocated. They're ready to wear the hat but they wear the hat to cover their consciousness. I want for us to actually, if you want to hear the Malcolm X hat, I want it to be a hat of consciousness rather than covering our consciousness at this time. This is the period apologetic is no longer acceptable, where moral confusion is not acceptable, ethical confusion is not acceptable. If the Shihab family, 44 members are wiped out by a missile that is provided for them by the United States government, by a plane that is paid for by our taxes, sent to them with the president giving them a green light to do whatever, or Lindsey Graham saying to flatten this place because this is a religious war. This is for every Muslim to recognize what was happening today in Israel might be tomorrow happening to Muslims in India, might happen, which already happened in Muslims for Bosnia, which also might impact our families and children and families in this country, as Wadi have just saw just yesterday. So we need to actually, at this point, we are aggrieved, we are in pain, but let's don't mistaken our pain and our grief for a lack of resolve for doing what is needed and challenge ourselves and challenging every place that we see in this country. So definitely this is a moment for us. It's a wake-up moment, not that we didn't have earlier, but this is a wake-up moment that is how we have to have a very clear way forward. And I encourage people to continue to engage in Palestine and don't fall into, we have to separate between the local and transnational. We cannot separate local, transnational, the same way Malcolm did not actually separate between the local, transnational, and MLK. I actually really encourage people who think in trying to make these decisions, go and listen to the last two speeches, especially the speech of Martin Luther King, The Three Evils of Society and Silence is Complicity. I think what we need to go and listen, because they're still very informative and very critical in how we view our role and what we need to be doing at this particular time. I know for students who are facing challenges at the university, again, I ask you to reach out to CARE. We have been working with CARE in partnership, work with MLFA, Muslim Legal Fund of America, which I also chair, reach out to the organized National Lawyers Guild, have been doing tremendous work. So we do have a legal team and legal arm that we could actually bring to bear. Don't allow the administration or some individuals that don't see their head from their tail to try to dissuade you from actually being conscious, being forthcoming, going out protesting and saying what you need to say about your position, your feeling, and your perspective relative to Palestine. So thank you for giving me the time, and I would listen, inshallah. Jazakumullah khair. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give tawfiq to everyone that is working on the Maristan project, and look forward to our continued cooperation and work. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Thank you so very much, Dr. Hatem Bazian. I really appreciate your words, helping us contextualize everything that is happening in real time, of course, historically, but certainly also in this present moment. And also your words and call to action, which I think are incredibly important. Thank you so much for this. And I hope as we continue on with today's program, the attendees here can really take to heart exactly what you're saying and also what to do next. And with that, we'll segue to the next part of our program. Before I do so, I want to just welcome everybody again. Assalamu alaikum, greetings of peace to everybody who's just recently joined us. I want to also give a special recognition to MSA National, the Muslim Student Association National, who we have many students amongst us, and Dr. Hatem, you spoke directly to the students as well. Many of them are actually here representing almost 2,500 different MSAs across this country. So we're very happy to have all of you with us. And that is probably the best segue I can have really to the next speaker, who we really appreciate his presence here. And before I fully introduce our next speaker and what we're going to be speaking about, Brother Bassem Al-Qurra, I wanted to just say to you, Brother Bassem, first and foremost, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have mercy on those in your family who have passed away. My understanding is that your family has directly been impacted by everything happening in Gaza. عظم الله أجرك وأحسن عزاؤك وغفر لميتك. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have mercy on those who've passed away, magnify your reward, make better your solace, and forgive those who have passed away. And so with that, folks, I'm going to introduce to you our next speaker, Brother Bassem, who is really has much to share, mashallah. And he is the executive director of CARE California Sacramento Valley Central California office that serves to empower and protect our community. He is also the first Muslim and first Palestinian to be elected to office in California's capital. We're all very proud of you, Brother Bassem. He was also elected to the school board in 2016. The Sacramento Bee selected Bassem to be one of the top 25 Asian Pacific Islander leaders in the capital region last year. And his family is directly, as I mentioned, from Gaza. And so, subhanAllah, in the midst of personal turmoil, he's here with us today. And also to share with us actually everything that CARE has to offer to our community in terms of support, legal resources, and general civil rights resources. So I welcome you very much on behalf of Maristan. Thank you so much for joining us, Brother Bassem.
Thank you, Dr. Rania. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Ameen to all your du'as. And subhanAllah, Bismillah, Rasulullah, before I begin, I'll talk about the legal aspects of the work. SubhanAllah, this is not, our first rodeo. And, being Palestinian, being from the Gaza Strip, every few years we have to go through this emotional roller coaster. And, and for someone from Gaza, you feel this survivor's guilt where you feel guilty being in the United States, being in a country where your taxpayer dollars are funding the death of your own family members. So it's tough. It's tough. And this is one of my relatives, Farah Al-Qarra, who I've never met. I haven't been to Gaza since 2005. We weren't allowed to go. And just recently, we had some family members that were finally able to go and visit our loved ones, and haven't seen my aunts, my uncles, my cousins. And this was due to a US policy where they weren't advocating on our behalf to ensure that we're allowed to go see our loved ones. But when I saw this picture, I've never met Farah, but she kind of reminds me of my sister when she was young, when she was that age. And it hits hard. And every few years we have to go through this, unfortunately. And every night we're calling our relatives, checking in on them. We check in on them when we wake up. Then we check in when they wake up and say, did you make it? Is everyone okay? And unfortunately, this past week, it hasn't been okay. And every few days, loved ones are being killed. But it's not about my family. It's about almost every family in Gaza. We had a community member here in California, in Sacramento, where this brother lost his father, 4 brothers, and 2 nephews in an attack. And their neighbors were also killed. The Abu Daqqa family, also close to where we live in the Gaza Strip, they lost in one attack, over 20 and 14 children were killed. And now what the Palestinians are doing is that they're splitting their families apart. The father will stay in the house with some of the kids. The mother will take the other kids and go to her family's house in the hopes that if, there is an attack, that some of them will survive. And so this attack is just, is brutal, over 700 children killed. I really appreciate Maristan and MSC National for holding this circle, because everyone needs to heal through this, and it takes a toll after every few years going through this. It takes a huge toll, and so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless all of you for doing this, and all those from the Gaza Strip, all those from Palestine, all those that hurt and have that pain. We have amazing resources now, somehow, that we didn't have before, that we didn't have in 2008 war, 2014 war. And really just want to thank Maristan for all the tremendous work. It's one of the most important organizations in our community, and really thank you for doing this. Now I'm going to go over some of the legal aspects of the work. In the chat, we're going to be sharing a bit.ly. It's I believe it's Gaza dash response. Gaza dash, so it's bit.ly, bit.ly / Gaza dash response. And I'm going to be just briefly discussing some of the important things that our community is going through right now. Right now, we have folks that they're seeing their companies send out one-sided letters discussing what's happening over there, supporting Israel, while our people are getting, killed. Now, I must say there's a disclaimer here when it comes to engaging with your employer, unfortunately. So California laws generally prohibit employers from retaliating against employees for their lawful political activities that are non-work related and occur during non-work hours. However, employees should be aware that political beliefs affiliations are not protected categories under federal, state, and anti-discrimination laws. And political activity may not be protected activity. So we just have to put that out there that, we want you to be vocal. We want you to engage in your workplace. If you're not sure of what to do, make sure you contact your local care civil rights department. And we have a letter, and we'll be updating this landing page where we're going to be including a lot of these letters, so you can just copy and paste. And so we have a letter for employers that's says, "Dear so and so," the employer name. The situation in Palestine, Israel is top of on the mind of many people right now, especially your Israeli, Jewish, Muslim, Palestinian, and Arab employees. I'm concerned about the company's one-sided stance to stand by Israel, and it goes on and on. So these are templates that are there. And like I said, if you have specific questions, please contact your local care civil rights department, and they can walk you through it and your rights at your workplace. Another important issue right now is doxing. So doxing is short for dropping documents, and it's a malicious practice of researching and publicly disclosing private or personal information about an individual or entity on the internet without their consent. And so a lot of times they'll share full names, addresses, phone numbers, email addresses, the workplace, family information, other identifying data. Now, doxing is considered to be an indirect form of cyber harassment and is illegal in California. And so make sure that, how can you protect yourself? So you got limit personal information, use pseudonyms, make sure you check your privacy settings, be cautious with photos, and use strong passwords, and of course enable two-factor authentication. And so all these documents, like I said, we'll be updating this link, and you'll have access to all this important information. And another place we've seen is the school. We've seen some school districts issue one-sided statements. So we have prepared a template for you to use in your child's school. It says, "To whom to may concern, my name is so-and-so, and I am concerned parent guardian of so-and-so, a student currently enrolled in the school. I'm writing to express my deep disappointment regarding the recent statements made by concerning the recent violence between Israel and Gaza. These statements, while intended to address the recent situation, have presented a one-sided perspective, showing solidarity and concern only for Israel with no acknowledgement of the ongoing historical suffering and death of the Palestinians." And it's a long letter. So another template right there for folks to use. Another thing we're also releasing is a community alert that FBI is targeting Palestinians for questioning following escalation in Palestine and Israel. And it goes to what your rights are. You have the right to remain silent. You always have the right to request an attorney's assistance. If they do come to your house, you just say, we'll have our care attorney call you back, and we get on that immediately. And unfortunately, we want to make sure that our community, despite these things happening here and there, we don't, some of these things are done, unfortunately, to put fear into the community, to make sure that they're to become afraid to speak out. And I think we're in a different world now than the post 9/11 world. And we're seeing young Muslims, young Palestinians, young allies of all stripes, not afraid anymore. They're not afraid to speak out and challenge what Israel is doing. While in the past, post 9/11, it was Muslim parents that were telling their children, be quiet, don't get involved in the MSA. I think times have changed where people now feel empowered and they have the organizations in the community to protect them and to support them while they're doing this. Other things is knowing your rights as a protester. And so we also included that. We have a Gaza toolkit, talking points. We have letters to elected officials. And this is an important one because we're seeing many elected officials, especially in the first few days, one-sided statements. And I'll tell you, instead of getting, we should get upset and frustrated, absolutely. At the same time, some of these folks, they were just given statements to post and they posted it. And then once we started engaging them, many of them have actually apologized publicly. They didn't realize that their one-sided statement gave a green light just what, green light to the Israeli government to carry out this massacre of Palestinians. And so now you're seeing many more balanced statements, and actually many statements now addressing the plight of the Palestinians. So don't get frustrated, just reach out to them, try to educate them. And if they hear from so many community members, I bet you will see a wave of elected officials either retract or have more balanced statements. And so this is really important right now. And we have an action alert. If you go to the CARE California website, you go to the CARE National website, you will see an action alert. And it just takes literally a few seconds, 5 seconds of your time. You put in your name, your address, your information, and it sends a message to our elected officials. And we need to keep up the pressure because we are seeing elected officials now retract some of their statements. And then also making sure that where you're getting your information from. Unfortunately, there's a lot of fake news sometimes on both sides, but mostly on the other side. And we have to make sure that we're getting our information from reputable sources. So making sure you go to Al Jazeera, you go to, and I'll list off a few of them right now, Al Jazeera, and then the Institute for Middle Eastern Understanding, imeu.org, B'Tselem, the Israeli Human Rights Organization, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, radio stations, 94.1 KPFA in Northern California, 90.7 KPFK in Southern California. So it's really important that you get your information and you're sharing from reputable sources, and make sure you're liking posts, that you're reposting posts to keep, and at the time when we're hearing of shadow bans, if that's happening to you, if your posts are getting deleted, and your content getting moderated by Facebook and Instagram and other social media platforms, make sure you report it to CARE. We are pushing back. We are reaching. There's a lot. We do have allies at these companies that are also pushing back, but make sure you report it if it's happening to you. So I think I'll leave it there. The link that I have has all this information. It goes into detail. It's literally copy and paste. Just make sure that we're in a different climate right now. You have the organizations, you have CARE, you have ADC, you have so many organizations out there that are really pushing back hard, and it's making a difference. But we just have to make sure that we just don't go to a protest and then we just feel good about ourselves and then that's it, we go home and it's over. No, it has to be sustained engagement. We have to. This is the least that we can do to commit to our brothers and sisters in Gaza and the West Bank, is that we commit that it's going to be sustained engagement. Anytime there's an action alert, say, oh no, my voice doesn't count. No, it does count. Elected officials are telling us we're not hearing from enough of your community members. So they need to hear from us. Our employers need to hear from us. Our schools need to hear from us. We have 2 letters. We have one for K-12 and we have one for universities. And right now we are hearing folks getting fired from their jobs because of their activism and social media posts. Make sure you reach out to us. You reach out to us immediately and we will handle it. So I really appreciate Maristan and MSA for holding this important town hall.
Thank you so much, Brother Bassem. God, I really appreciate you. And I appreciate on behalf of all of CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations, and honestly, all of the work. Many of us, as soon as there seems to be any sort of trouble or we need to turn to advice and help, CARE is the organization many of us turn to. And so I really appreciate you and all of the efforts, mashallah. And speaking of resources, we're going to be sharing resources throughout this conversation, but also we're going to have them for you as links. And so if you're looking at the chat box, you'll see there are links for you, all the ones that Brother Bassem has actually told us about. And I also want to introduce to you a new resource that we're releasing today, speaking about everything that's happening, but particularly from a mental health perspective, which is actually where we're going next with our conversation. It is a guidebook called the Mental Health Guidebook for those concerned about Palestine. And over this last week or so, members of my lab at the Stanford University Muslim Mental Health and Islamic Psychology Lab have spent countless hours and nights putting together this resource guide for all of you, in addition to the resources that are on the slide here that Brother Bassem told us about. And I want to draw your attention to this resource because many of you have also said, we understand now the context or need to learn more about it. We want to understand the historical speaking points and the current context. We also want to understand our legal rights and how to defend ourselves and be able to go forward in a heavily Islamophobic climate that is certainly increasing. The next question that we get and have been getting is, how do we process everything that has been happening? This is such an emotionally laden time. It is heavy. There are so many people who honestly not just move to tears, but almost a level of demoralization by everything that is happening. How do we process and how do we help our children and our families process? The next part of our segment of our program will focus specifically on that. And I also want to share with you again this resource that you may now download. And please share with everybody. What it does is it contextualizes the recent distress amongst Muslim populations, given everything that is happening. It helps us understand mental health experiences related to the Palestine crisis in specific. And it goes through general recommendations and resources of Islamic coping and how to take care of your mental health as a Muslim in this context, and engaging with others around you while keeping care of your own mental health and well-being. And so this is a good point then to introduce the next segment of our program and our next series of speakers, which I'm very honored actually to have with us this evening. Thank you so much, Dr. Jess Ghannam, who's going to be joining us next. And let me introduce to you Dr. Jess, for those who are not familiar with him and his work, excellent work, and also tell you what he will be focusing on in the conversation. Dr. Jess Ghannam is a clinical professor of psychiatry and global health sciences at the School of Medicine at UCSF at San Francisco. His research areas include evaluating the long-term health consequences of war on displaced communities and the psychological and psychiatric effects of armed conflict on children. He's developed community health clinics in the Middle East that focus on developing community-based treatment programs for families in crisis. And then here locally, he works to promote and enhance the health and wellness of refugees, displaced and immigrant populations from the Middle East, North Africa, South Asia, and has established a community-based mental health treatment program to support these communities. We're really honored to have Dr. Ghannam with us. And what he'll be focusing on in this conversation is mental health support, particularly the long-term health consequences of the Palestinian experience. How do we see these consequences manifest? And also to understand certain specific aspects such as survivor's guilt, which many of us are feeling, secondhand trauma, which also many of us are experiencing, and intergenerational trauma, all of which he's going to define for us more closely and help us understand how to process fully. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Jess Ghannam.
Dr. Rania, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh. Thank you so much.
Bless you. Thank you for
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Rania. I want to thank Dr. Rania and Maristan for inviting me to speak today, and the tremendous effort that Dr. Rania and her team have put this together is tremendous, and we want to thank you so much for doing this. This is a very painful and difficult time for our communities, and I'm saying communities plural, because it's many communities who are suffering right now. Every day we are traumatized and devastated by what's happening in Palestine. We're experiencing profound grief, sadness, anger, and deep disappointment as we face this unfolding catastrophe in Gaza. As a community, we are completely traumatized. And so what I'd like to do is put some historical context in trying to understand what we're feeling, what we're experiencing, and what we're going through right now. And to offer some ways to think about how to cope and manage for ourselves, for our families, for our children, and our communities. I'd like to also share with you, I've been doing a lot of talking about the mental health consequences of what's happening in Gaza right now and in Palestine. And frequently I get asked about post-traumatic stress disorder. Let me be very clear about this. In the Palestinian context, there is no post in post-traumatic stress disorder. Because for someone to have post-traumatic stress disorder, there has to be an end. There has to be a post. There has to be a period of time and a space where the traumatic experiences that one has experienced has stopped. This is not the Palestinian experience. Quite the contrary. Since 1917, although I'm going to start in 1948, but since 1948, there has been continuous, unremitting traumatic exposure for Palestinian communities. And that has created a context for all of us in terms of what we're experiencing now that is causing extreme distress, anxiety, insomnia, irritability, and many difficulties with our ability to relate to one another, with our families, and with our children who are really struggling right now. So as Dr. Rania said, what I'd like to do is define some of these things so that we can better understand it. There are 4 or 5 concepts that I'd like to talk about today. One is called transgenerational trauma. Transgenerational trauma is a trauma that one generation can experience, and that because of the severity and intensity of that experience and that trauma gets passed on from generation to generation to generation. We know, for example, that in 1948, with the Palestinian catastrophe or Nakba, when 800,000 Palestinians were forcibly removed from their homes and 500 villages were depopulated, that left an indelible mark and imprint on our grandparents, our great-grandparents, and that experience was carried forward from generation to generation to generation. And we know from research that this is not just a psychological or emotional inheriting of these psychological traumatic events. There's also a biological component that gets transmitted from generation to generation. So all of us have a piece of that transgenerational conflict. Now, in the Palestinian context, it's even more complicated because we have something called multi-generational trauma or multi-generational traumatic transference. And what that is that in the Palestinian context, you don't just have the trauma of 1948, you have the trauma of 1948, you have the Nakba, the occupation in 1967, you have the traumas, and I'm going to talk specifically about Gaza in a minute here, because in Gaza, you've had, since 2006, you've had no less than 5 significant militarized incursions where over 7,000 Palestinians have been killed, men, women, and children. I'm not even talking about the West Bank or Jerusalem or other periods of time, but specifically in the Gaza context since 2007, we're talking about 5 separate events. This is multi-generational trauma. In other words, each generation experiences multiple traumatic exposures that are carried internally and externally from generation to generation to generation. The next aspect of trauma, which is really important, especially in the context in Palestine and in Gaza, is something called continuous trauma. And this is why Palestinians, we cannot use the word PTSD. We can't use the word post-traumatic stress disorder, because since 1948, and especially in the last number of decades, there has been continuous traumatic exposure from settler colonial violence, from the blockade in Gaza, from the 5 militarized incursions in the Gaza Strip, where, as I said, 7,000 people have died and tens of thousands of people have been injured. This kind of trauma, and we've done research on this kind of traumatic exposure is unlike any traumatic exposure that any other community anywhere in the world has experienced. We've compared it to what happened to Iraqi children after the invasions after 9/11. We've compared them to children from other war-torn areas of the world who have experienced mass displacement and dislocation. This kind of trauma that Palestinians are experiencing, especially our children, is unlike anything. We have no map to understand the depth, the breadth, the transgenerational component to it, the multi-generational component to it, the persistence of it, and the impact that it's going to have on our current generation and generations to follow. I also want to talk about secondary trauma, which is something we're all experiencing, something Dr. Rania brought up. Secondary trauma is when you watch the news and you see images, or you watch social media and you see images of people in your community, in your family, people that you may even know, who are being displaced, who are being killed, and who are being bombed. Witnessing the trauma can be just as debilitating as experiencing the trauma itself. Now, when you have that secondary trauma and it's superimposed and put on top of the transgenerational trauma, the multi-generational trauma, or the continuous trauma, it creates a psychological catastrophe for some people that creates a kind of distress that may make it difficult to connect, to go forward with your life, to connect with your community, and it can be very debilitating. I also want to speak just briefly about something that my brother Bassem talked about, and that's the survivor's guilt. One of the things that's so difficult for all of us right now, watching this unfolding catastrophe in Gaza right now, we feel that guilt, that sense that our brothers and sisters are being slaughtered or being killed. Their homes are being destroyed. They're being displaced. They're being forcibly removed again. And we are here in this country, or wherever we are, relatively safe and not facing the enormity of the catastrophe. It leaves us with a sense of guilt also. The last aspect of the trauma that I'd like to speak about is the cultural trauma of being Muslim, of being Arab, of being Palestinian, of being an ally of a Palestinian. Our collective communities right now, when we watch the news reports, the one-sided news reports, when we see elected officials mourning the loss of lives among Israeli children and individuals, but completely neglecting what's happened in Palestine, and not just in Gaza, but the historical context of the occupation, of the dislocation, of the multiple generations that we've been facing, is a collective kind of trauma that we experience almost every single day. And this is a heavy burden. It's a heavy impact that we experience and takes a toll on us. Some of the warning signs that you may want to look out for: irritability, difficulty sleeping, not being able to tear yourself away from social media or the news, agitation, feeling shut down, feeling disconnected from your family. And I also want to talk very specifically about children, which is one area that I do a lot of work in. We have to be very careful about our children, especially, because when we're feeling overwhelmed, when we're feeling traumatized, and we are unable to find the room and the space and the opportunity to digest it and manage it and cope with it, our children do pick up on it. And there are certain things that we have to do with our children. And I want to just spend a little time talking about that. We need to be honest, and we need to talk to our children about what's happening. We can't gaslight them. We can't say everything is okay when it's not okay. Okay? We be honest with them. We tell them what's happening, but in a way that's appropriate for where they are developmentally. What you're going to say to a 4 or 5-year-old is different than what you're going to say to a teenager. You have to reassure your children that they are safe and that you're going to do everything you can to protect them. They have to have that sense of security and safety, that their family, their parents, their extended family is there and that they will be safe. You have to answer their questions and be honest about it. We can't make light of what's happening. We have to be direct. We have to say things to our children that are going to be difficult. But we have to do it in a way that is developmentally appropriate. And maybe we can talk about that in the next segment. The next thing that I want to talk about in terms of how we can help our children and our families, this is the hardest one for our community. But we have to limit our exposure to news and social media coverage of the event. 24/7 exposure to Al Jazeera or to X or Twitter, TikTok, Instagram is too much for our brains to be able to process, and it will become traumatic, and it will reduce your bandwidth both emotionally, psychologically, and cognitively, so your ability to think. It will impair it, and it will certainly impact your children. You have to encourage your children to express themselves in a safe, contained environment, and just keep that process open and honest. One of the things, and this is what my brother Bassem said, is that sometimes it's easy to feel pretty helpless about what to do. But in Arabic, we have a saying called fil haraka baraka, that there's a blessing in movement. And I think, and this will come in the next section also, but engaging with care, engaging with Maristan, engaging with public officials, engaging with your coworkers, with your neighbors, with your friends, who undoubtedly may not fully understand or comprehend or understand the true magnitude of what's happening, as well as its historical significance. There are lots of things that we can do. We have to get good sleep. We have to make sure we're eating correctly. We have to, make sure we're getting our exercise in. We have to participate in communal prayer together. But above and beyond that, we have to feel like we have agency, that we're doing something to help our brothers and sisters in Palestine, and that sense of hopelessness. That's part of what an occupation is. They kind of want our communities to give up and to not engage. But we have to engage. We have to stay engaged with ourselves, with our families, with our children, and with our communities, in our communities. Otherwise, the impact in what's happening globally right now in Palestine and beyond, we will miss the opportunity to help in ways that we can. So with that, I'd like to again say to Dr. Rania and Maristan, thank you so much. This is an extraordinary event. I hope it's not the last event. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you so much, Dr. Ghanam. Really appreciate your presence with us. Appreciate your work very much. And also walking us through kind of just even the terminology around mental health. There are things that we sometimes experience, but it's hard to put our emotions into words and explain what exactly is happening. And especially with our children, and you mentioned developmental milestones of children, how they express things or sometimes don't even express, but just their irritability, or they pick up all around us from different things that adults are saying, little snippets of things that adults are saying or doing, but they know something is off, but they can't quite put their finger on it either or express it to us. And so I really appreciate you mentioning that. And in the chat box, I wanted to let all of our attendees know that there is a link to an article that we had written called The Prophetic Wisdom of Speaking to Children in Times of Distress. And it breaks down by the developmental milestones of children, age by age, how exactly to talk to children and what to say based on their developmental milestones, both cognitively, emotionally, and spiritually. So I hope that's useful to folks, inshallah, as they're kind of taking in resources that we're offering. But thank you so very much again, Dr. Jess. I really appreciate your presence here, mashallah. I also wanted to welcome again all of our different participants and attendees. I really appreciate you being with us. And I hope you're paying attention to the chat box because we are sharing different links of different resources. We just mentioned this article. We previously mentioned the various resources that CARE has been sharing that we want all of you to know about. And also the new resource guide we just released today, mashallah, in conjunction with the Muslim Mental Health and Islamic Psychology Lab, called the Mental Health Guidebook for those who are concerned about Palestine. And so here too, we go through, and you can download this directly from Maristan's website, maristan.org. We'll put that link and all the links into your chat box, inshallah. And please know that there are other wonderful articles and resources being shared in the link as well, in the chat box as well, including some of Dr. Hatem Bazian's new articles too. So please do take a look at that and make sure you're taking hold of all those links. If you are on the road and not able to get these links directly, we will send an email out at the very end to all those who registered with these links again, so you can have them right at your tip of your fingers, inshallah ta'ala. I'd like to carry on now with the second part of our mental health discussion, and now segue into mental health and spiritual well-being together. The next couple of segments will kind of focus on mental health and also on spiritual guidance. And with that, our next speaker, inshallah, I'm really happy to have him here with us, Sheikh Tariq Muslah. You may have noticed that the entire panel, mashallah, are different folks from Palestinian backgrounds. And I was really keen on making sure that our mental health professionals that were here, and including, of course, our academic and spiritual advisors that are here, come from the Palestinian background, and that they're able to directly speak to their personal lived experience along with their academic work, research, writing, and advocacy. We have with us Sheikh Tariq Muslah now for this next segment. He is a graduate of the prestigious Medina University, where he attained his associate's degree in Arabic and a bachelor's degree in the College of Sharia. He completed his memorization of the Quran at the age of 13 and went on to receive an ijazah from Palestine. He studied classical Arabic at the Fajr Center in Egypt, and Sheikh Tariq has worked part-time instructor for Islamic Learning Foundation Chicago, where he taught Quran and Arabic studies. He served Young Muslims, or YM, for many years as a coordinator and murabbi. Sheikh Tariq has also served as the youth director for the Islamic Center of Naperville in Chicago, and became the youth director and assistant imam at the Mecca Center in Willowbrook, Illinois, where he is currently, mashallah. I also want to say that Sheikh Tariq shares something with me in that a double kind of somebody that we would say is dually trained, double trained, mashallah, both in Sharia and in the mental health sciences. He also has a master's of social work. And so with that, mashallah, we're going to turn the mic over to him and have him, mashallah, share with us a couple of very important things that focus on mental health support and spiritual guidance, particularly the mechanisms that we can use to cope with heightened emotional conflicts in these conflicting emotions and difficult times, and from a spiritual perspective as well. And inshallah, we're going to then follow this segment so you know what's coming next, with Dr. Omar Sulaiman also sharing with us from a spiritual perspective. And we come to the very end of the program, which will be our third segment after this. The focus then will shift to dua. And I say that now because we're going to have Sheikh Tariq join us twice, mashallah, and lead us in some of that dua towards the very end, or prayers at the very end of this program. So with that, Sheikh Tariq, the mic is yours.
جزاكم الله خيرا دكتور رانيا. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. الحمد لله حمد الشاكرين. الحمد لله دائما وأبدا. الحمد لله على كل حال. ونعوذ بالله من حال أهل النار. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك وأنعم وأكرم على سيد الخلق حبيبنا وشفيعنا وقرة أعيننا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك عليه في الأولين وفي الآخرين وفي الملأ الأعلى إلى يوم الدين. We begin by praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and thanking Him. Ya Allah, we thank you for each and every single one of the blessings that you've given us. We thank you, O Allah, for the blessing of community, the blessing of our leaders, the blessings of Sheikh Rania, Dr. Hatem, Dr. Jess, Brother Bassem, and all of the team behind today's event. We thank you, O Allah, for the blessing of every moment of freedom, every moment of drinkable water. We thank you, O Allah, for every morsel of food that we eat comfortably. We thank you, O Allah, for the blessings of the past, even if we have forgotten them, the blessings of the present, even if we aren't aware of them, and the blessings of the future, those blessings that have yet to come. But we are confident, O Allah, that because you are Allah, that those blessings are promised to us. And we ask of you, O Allah, to send your peace and blessings upon the one who taught us gratitude, the one who taught us resilience, the one who taught us to stand up for justice, my teacher and your teacher, my beloved and your beloved, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And we beg of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us from the followers of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam until the end of time. My dear brothers and sisters, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It is an honor to be here with each and every single one of you. Just being here, subhanAllah, has already been healing for me. Listening to our leaders, being in community, subhanAllah, is one of the things that we'll talk about as a mechanism of coping and a mechanism of healing. And what we just engaged in, that act of gratitude, this act of gratitude is where I will start our conversation. For so many of us, every hour of every day has been bombarded with images and videos of tragedy and bloodshed and injustice, and the heart becomes heavy. And the Imam Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala, he talks about the heart as a vessel, and he refers to our ears and our eyes as a window to the heart. And what we look at and what we listen to of sadness, of tragedy, of heartbreak, of injustice goes straight to our heart. And what that requires us to do, dear brothers and sisters, is to take a step back and to assess the state of our hearts. And the reality is, my heart and your heart are hearts that are mourning, hearts that are grieving, hearts that are hurting, hearts that are trying to make sense of things that don't make sense and cannot make sense. And the reality is that this is a heart that is in need of treatment and in need of healing, both from a mental health perspective and from a spiritual health perspective. And I think the beginning of it is the acknowledgement, the idrak or the ma'rifah of the fact that we are in a state of hurt and in a state of pain and difficulty. And it's okay for us, as privileged as we are, as entitled as we may be, as luxurious as our lives may look like, to recognize that this is a time of difficulty and pain and stress for each and every single one of us. And what that might look like, my dear sister and brother, is that things that might typically be very easy for us, waking up and taking our kids to school, going to work, sitting through meetings, things that we typically do subconsciously even, right now may feel impossible for us. And that may be the weight of the difficulty that we're in. So I want to invite you and myself to acknowledge the difficulty and the weight of the movement of the moment that we are in. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, through his most beautiful names and attributes, that he makes it easy for us and he makes it easy for our brothers and sisters in Gaza. This moment of acknowledging pain and difficulty in our own lives may seem dismissive of the pain and the difficulty in the lives of those suffering in the lands of Gaza. And yet the reality is, by acknowledging our own pain and difficulty, we become best equipped with treating it. And when we treat ourselves and we treat our hearts and we treat our homes, we are more capable of being advocates and representatives for those that are struggling across Gaza and across Palestine. And so I want to take that first moment to just acknowledge our pain and to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to heal us from our pain, and to realize that our pain is real, and that what we're witnessing, what we're hearing, what we're exposed to every single day is impacting our hearts. And that pain is in fact spiritually a sign of Iman. And what we fear is numbness, right? This idea of no longer feeling the pain and the sadness. So alhamdulillah, this is an indication of a working spiritual heart and of a conscience that is alive. And yet acknowledging that pain gives us the obligation to individually take care of our own needs, and we'll talk about that later. The second thing that I began talking about, which is our act of gratitude. Moments of active gratitude is one of the best ways that we can heal and cope, both as individuals and as a community. You see, it's very easy right now to view our world through a lens of darkness. Darkness upon darkness, injustice, discrimination, racism, so many things that we are experiencing, sometimes firsthand. Like living here in Chicago today was a day of great sadness for our community and across the country and across the world at the death of our young child, Wadi'. It was a day that was very difficult. I stepped into an Islamic school today. I was introduced to a young brother, and he said, and he mentioned to me that 30 of his relatives have passed away in Gaza. This is a tragedy that we can't even begin to heal from, dear brothers and sisters. And yet the reality is that it necessitated that we take a moment that with all of this darkness, with all of this sadness, to take a moment to count the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to see what we have worth celebrating. You see, we are facing a trial and a tribulation, just like our brothers and sisters in Gaza are facing a trial and tribulation. Ours is sarra, and theirs may look like darra. The ours is the difficulty of the luxury, the freedom, the peace, and the tranquility, and the relative safety that we have, versus the apocalyptic and indescribable conditions that they are living in. But part of our response to this is learning to celebrate the blessings of Allah that we overlooked each and every single day. To leave our homes quite confident that we'll go back to our spouses and children. To get in our cars with a full certainty to an extent that we'll get to where we are trying to get to without any borders, without any checkpoints, without any guns to our head. The ability to know that if we open the fridge, that we have a matter of 17 choices of what we can eat at that exact moment. These are blessings of Allah. And we can respond to it with guilt. And I don't blame you for being inclined to respond to it with guilt. But what our Prophet ﷺ invites us to do, and what we learn through the books of psychology, is that guilt at some point of time must lead us to being a community of gratitude, a people who sit in gratefulness. And this gratitude can then lead us to action. I invite you, my dear brothers and sisters, to sit at your dinner tables with your children, with your spouses, with your family, with your parents, with your loved ones, and to celebrate the blessings of Allah Ta'ala together, to count them and to feel them. Because in a world right now, where it's so easy to say of everything that's going wrong, it is necessary that we talk about everything that's going right, to acknowledge the blessings of Allah Ta'ala in my life and yours. This, and to go from there, first we talked about acknowledging the pain and recognizing the pain. Then we talked about using this moment of being in the midst of pain to still see the light of Allah and the light of hope in the midst of darkness. But there's also another darkness that so many of our speakers tonight spoke about, and that is the darkness of ignorance and the darkness of misinformation. And part of what we can do that is a part of my self-care and your self-care, beyond the consumer-based self-care of lighting candles and relaxing and making coffee, which, trust me, I enjoy as much as everyone else here, is to go to the avenue of self-care, of equipping ourselves with knowledge, being the ambassadors of Allah on this earth. Antum khulafa Allahi ala al-ard. We are the representatives of Allah and the truth of Allah on this earth. So to spend some time taking a step back from all of the reactionary news and all of the Instagram clips and say, wait. Do I actually know what's led us to this moment? Why are we here and how did we get here? And alhamdulillah, from the links that were shared, from the resources, from the leaders, and everything that they gave us, and all of the resources that Maristan has made accessible to us, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless and reward the team. We have the opportunity every day to take a step back for 15 minutes with our children, with our spouses, with our community, with our masajid, with our mashayikh, and to become more educated and aware of the reality of the history of Palestine, the reality of the circumstances that we're in today. And I guarantee you, dear brothers and sisters, that as you become more educated, you will become more resilient to stand up for the people of Palestine. Right now, our wells of wellness, the individual wells of wellness that we are, may have begun to feel dry. We might feel exhausted in the beginning of the day, when we usually feel exhausted at the end of the day. And it might begin to feel like we're feeling helpless, debilitated. And this is exactly what the occupation wants. That not only have they occupied lands, not only have they taken the women and the children, but they've occupied the hearts and the minds and the intellects of young brothers and sisters, Muslim brothers and sisters, people of all faiths and all backgrounds across the world, and they've debilitated them from the ability to care and the ability to stand up. And so our response to that, my dear brothers and sisters, is to be a people who are informed, educated, and equipped and armed with the facts so that we can go, inshaAllah ta'ala, and be a people who appropriately represent the Palestinian cause, inshaAllah ta'ala. And that's why this leads me to my next point, is that now that we are a people that acknowledge our own pain, and now that we are a people that in the midst of acknowledging our own pain, we are celebrating the blessings of Allah Ta'ala in our lives, we then become a people who are informed. Once we are a people that are informed, my dear brothers and sisters, we can then become a people who, after we go out to the masses and we go and we inform everyone around us, we take a moment to step back to be with Allah. Right now, nothing can heal you like taking a moment of stillness to stop the noise all around you to observe the noise inside of you and to hand that noise over to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. To take all of the storm that's brewing inside of you and I, and to talk to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala about that. There is a direct correlation of the status of our world and the status of our hearts with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's why our teachers invite us to use opportunities like this to retreat to Allah and to reform our relationships with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Sometimes Allah ta'ala shakes the world around us as a way to wake us up. We know the status of the people. We know the reward of those that have been wrongly oppressed. We know the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes care of them in the hereafter. But what about you and I? Using this opportunity to retreat to moments of stillness, where we observe what's happening inside of us and we retreat to our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is something that is so important. And one of the best ways that we do that is through gatherings like this. I want to take the opportunity again to thank Dr. Rania, Sheikh Rania, as always, leading these efforts, and to the entire Maristan team. But I want to invite my brothers and sisters from across the country and across the world to create gatherings like this, replicate gatherings like this. Our ummah started in the streets of Mecca in a time of distress, in a time of division, in a time of oppression, and they retreated to a small place by the name of Dar al-Arqam. And there came out the greatest generations, people of hope, people of resilience, people of courage, and people that after Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because of them, we are who we are as the ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. So be a representative of Allah by going to your masjid, going to your family, going to your friends, and just be in community. You know, I'll end you with a statement of Al-Imam Al-Ghazali rahimahullah ta'ala. He talks about our masajid and our sacred spaces like this. And he says, everyone retreats to them as a patient seeking healing. We are all patients. We all have our own diseases, our own conflicts, our own issues. And yet Al-Imam Al-Ghazali rahimahullah, he says something beautiful. He says what we often forget is that we are the medicine of one another. So to use community spaces like this as a means of treatment for ourselves, but also to enter into these spaces as a medicine and a means of healing for those around us. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless the people of Palestine. I beg of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant comfort and strength to us and to those that are suffering. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He allows us to be blessed with more and more gatherings like this. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to reward each and every single one of you for attending this gathering. And with that, inshallah ta'ala, I'll hand it over to Dr. Rania, inshallah.
Barakallahu feek, Sheikh Tariq. I so appreciate your words. SubhanAllah, such wise words, such difficult times. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you, increase you, subhanAllah, and really allow us to live by these words that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us in our deen. It's very often that we hear words like take care of your mental health, make sure that you fill your cup so that you can continue pouring out of it. It's much harder, of course, to do these things, easier said than done. But you gave us some very practical tips and advice on how exactly to do so. So I really appreciate that. Alhamdulillah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless all of those who have been speaking to us tonight, all of our speakers, all of our experts. May Allah bless them all. I want to, at this moment, kind of just emphasize a couple of things related to mental health and well-being. We have talked about how difficult it is to tear ourselves away from our phones, from our news feeds, we want so desperately to know everything that's happening, and it makes a whole lot of sense. But what we may not be realizing is how much we're carrying, just that emotional load, and how much what you said, Sheikh Tariq, about gratitude, shukr, of every morsel we took, every drink that we drank, remembering that our sisters and brothers are denied from these things. But instead of having this overriding levels of guilt, instead channeling that into shukr and hamd, gratitude and thankfulness to God, and also dua, prayers for them. And as Brother Bassem said earlier, and Dr. Hatem, actionable steps. It's not enough to just protest and kind of wave our fists in these protests, although we must show up. But in addition, to take the very actionable steps, first at home, locally, within our communities, and then nationally and globally, inshallah ta'ala. With that, inshallah, I'd like to move us to the next section of our program and share with you something very, very heavy that many of you probably already know. But in case some of you are not as familiar with the events in the last 48 hours, it's been incredibly difficult for so many, really across the Ummah, of course, and certainly right here at home. Some of you are familiar with a young 6-year-old boy named Wadi al-Fayoumi, whose landlord came over and knocked over at the door of their house. And the mother opened the door as she would normally, as somebody that she's familiar with and knows for some time. And this person that otherwise should have been a known person to them, a safe person to them, proceeded to stab the mother. And when she ran to go call 911, he proceeded then to stab her 6-year-old son, who then died because of his injuries. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have mercy on his soul and give the mother, who is still critically injured in the hospital, full shifa and recovery. Because of these horrific events in which it's very clear that everything we've talked about, especially what Dr. Hatem said earlier, that when news coverage and misinformation is rampant, so does the direct effects of that come directly to us here at home as well. And the levels of Islamophobia rise. And we are at that moment again. And so with this, inshallah, the next speaker, who is no stranger to all of you, Sheikh Dr. Omar Sulaiman, who is the founder and president of the Yaqeen Institute for Islamic Research, an adjunct professor of Islamic Studies in the Graduate Liberal Studies program at Southern Methodist University, and an imam to so many of us. Apologizes for not being able to be here in person, however, sent to us from in front of the funeral of young Wadia, some words of wisdom and advice to us all, spiritual. He's literally on the plane right now, and message saying that he wanted so much to be part of this program, as much as we wanted him to be here too, was in a more important place, which is directly with the family of Wadia and with the community, giving words of wisdom and attending the funeral janazah prayer there in Illinois. And so we're going to play that video for you, because I think what he has to say is incredibly important, and not just pertinent and time sensitive because it's happening literally right now in real time as we're speaking, but also comforting and healing. So please tune in, inshallah, to what Sheikh Ahmed will be sharing. And right after this, we're going to be sharing some important resources as well for all of you. And please make sure you stay on, because there are also du'as or prayers that we want to focus the last segment of our program on, and hope all of you will say a collective Ameen, because when the Muslims make dua for their fellow believers, without knowing even their names, behind their backs, that dua is more likely to be answered than any other. And so we need that collective dua for our sisters and brothers today. And we hope all of you will not leave until we actually do this dua together, inshallah. With that, I turn it over to Sheikh Dr. Omar Sulaiman.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, dear brothers and sisters that are joining the state of Maristan. You all, may Allah Azza wa Jalla reward you all. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alleviate your anxiety, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow you to alleviate the oppression of our brothers and sisters overseas, to use you for this noble and righteous cause. We're actually here the janazah and the death and the burial of young 6-year-old Wadir, who was stabbed multiple times. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have mercy on him and accept him as a shaheed. His mother, Hanan, is in critical condition. May Allah heal her. She wasn't even able to attend the janazah of her son. And I wanted us to reflect in these moments, on what faith gives people in this time. We went to the cemetery to see the father of here, to see his uncle who was like his grandfather. And the way that they said that our son is a shaheed bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, and we put him forward to join the shuhada of Gaza, the young shuhada of Gaza. I thought to myself, how do you do this without faith? How do you do this without iman? It is only Iman that allows these people to have this remarkable strength that otherwise is completely foreign to people. Now, here's the thing: as Muslims, we have to find this middle ground, right, where we have complete outrage over the complete transgression that we see against sacred bodies, sacred souls, sacred lands, and at the same time have hope that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not allow any of this to go in vain. And so when you do the ghusl of a young boy like Wadir, when you see the pain in the eyes of the family, you remember that the souls of these people are dwelling in places that we cannot even perceive in terms of their beauty and in terms of the reward. And that's something that's really profound. SubhanAllah, Allah Azza wa Jalla tells us about Uhud in those ayat, that when the shuhada of Uhud went forward, they wanted to be able to come back and tell their families that they were living in blessing, that they were living in na'im, and that they couldn't wait to be joined by their families. Our family in Palestine, our family in Gaza, our family that we put forth, one day we're going to be joined with them bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. But so long as we stay committed to righteousness bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, and we stay committed to this for the long term bi'idhnillah. I know that for a lot of us, there are times where we feel completely defeated, and we have to embrace that emotion. Allah Azza wa Jal mentions al-huzn twice. You know, subhanAllah, I was thinking about this concept of grief. When Allah Azza wa Jal talks about those who are dying, the righteous believers, when they are dying, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, أَلَّا تَخَافُوا وَلَا تَحْزَنُوا. Don't be afraid and don't grieve. Meaning, it's natural you're going to grieve over what you are leaving behind. And for those who survive and have to keep on fighting, وَلَا تَهِنُوا وَلَا تَحْزَنُوا. Do not lose heart and don't grieve. The common word here is grief. Grief is a part of who we are. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us this emotion because if we don't grieve when we see things like this and there's something that's wrong with us, the point is channel that grief into dua, channel that grief into action, channel that grief and being there for people. And the Prophet ﷺ said that a man complained, or Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu said a man complained to the Prophet ﷺ about his hard heart. The Prophet ﷺ told him to caress the head of an orphan. Our hearts are being softened right now, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. Hopefully we're praying more than we were before. Hopefully we're more grateful than we were before. Hopefully we're more committed and connected to the ummah, this one body than we were before. So grief is an important emotion that we have, but we have to channel that grief in righteous ways. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless the people of Gaza. May Allah Azza wa Jalla hold them through this catastrophe, pour upon them His rahmah, His mercy, accept all of their dead as-shuhada. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala join the people of Gaza who are passing away with the Prophet ﷺ. Join us with the Prophet ﷺ when we pass away. May Allah Azza wa Jalla let Wadi''s soul be joined with the souls of all those beautiful children that have passed away, that did not have the press conferences, that did not have the dignified janaz, the dignified funerals that we saw today. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow our hearts to be filled with that which is pleasing to Him and guide our actions to be of those that are pleasing to Him. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive us for our shortcomings. Allahumma naqina min ad-dunya wal khataaya allati takisu biha allati tanzilu al-bala. We seek refuge in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from the sins that could cause du'as to be rendered invalid or that could cause trials to befall us. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala enable us and enable us in a way that we do that which is best for us and do that which is best for our brothers and sisters.
May Allah bless Sheikh Omar. May Allah bless our scholars and our teachers. SubhanAllah, as you saw there in the video, Sheikh Omar is standing literally right in front of the masjid in which Wadia's family attended and where the janazah, the funeral prayer happened, and the burial. It's incredibly emotional. I don't know how many of you had the chance to see that video and the father speak. The mother is still in the hospital, and so we keep her in our prayers, and the entire family, entire community and communities that are grieving today, subhanAllah, both here, of course, at home and then abroad and across the Muslim ummah. And with that, inshallah, this is a time where I'd like to share with you some points, inshallah, and resources, recap a couple of the things that we've spoken about, and really come to a conclusion related to spiritual advice and dua, because I think one of the main things that we can do and make sure that we don't neglect doing is underestimating the power of dua or prayer. And that will be the final segment of the program, inshallah. Before I do so, I wanted to share with you some of these resources from earlier. There are resources related to knowing your rights while protesting and other resources that were shared by Brother Bassem by CARE. And those links, inshallah, have been in the chat box, but we will put them again. I also want to share with you here resources directly from Dr. Hatem's lab and program, the Islamophobia Study Center, and some really excellent resources understanding everything that is happening also in the context of Islamophobia. And certainly the story of Wadia rahmatullahi alayhi, may Allah have mercy on him, directly speaks to that level of Islamophobia that is spiking in our country at this moment. Also, I shared a resource earlier that was just released today, the Mental Health Guidebook for those concerned about Palestine. And in this particular resource, there is some historical context and discussion, but I also wanted to explain to you the here are kind of step-by-step understanding of Palestine within the framework of the settler colonialism, understanding the mental health and emotional experiences under colonialism, and also understanding what it means to decolonize mental health, resistance, resilience. There are also resources on Islamic coping and taking care of our mental health from an Islamic framework as Muslims, and engaging with others around us around the topic of Palestine, and just learning more. There are many, many links and resources, lots of references, both academic and other resources that you can click directly on that links you to this. Many people have been asking for, and there have been, alhamdulillah, different resource guides that have been put out in these last few days. And here is one specific to mental health, as many people have requested this. My deep thanks and appreciation to a wonderful team of researchers at my lab at Stanford University, the Muslim Mental Health and Islamic Psychology Lab, that literally been working around the clock to create this. And Maristan, my thanks to them, of course, for disseminating this to the community. This is how our partnership works. The lab creates the academic resources. The nonprofit Maristan, one of its many functions is disseminating it to all of you in the general community, both in resource guides like this, but also in webinars such as the one we are in now, and the monthly learning circles and healing circles that we have that are free and open to all of you. In addition to another thing, which is very important that Maristan offers, particularly to those of you in the state of California, which is our clinic, our mental health services that are accessible to all of you in California. And I know that that may not be necessarily to those outside of it. However, our resources, our website are full of resources that you can download, videos that you can watch, other programs, even khutbahs or sermons that you can give directly on the topic of mental health. And I hope that is of use to you, inshallah ta'ala. Please do look at all the resources that we've put in the chat box and here on the slides, and that we will email out to all of you as well, and share them with your families, with your friends, with your communities, because I think the more solid information that is out there, the better to really combat the misinformation. And something Dr. Hatem spoke of and Brother Bassem spoke of is the importance of educating those around us. Sometimes it is misinformation, ignorance, and that you can do a lot in educating your fellow coworker, neighbor, friends. And we also know in terms of Islamophobia research that when the most important thing in bringing down Islamophobia is a personal connection with a Muslim person. That when your neighbors, your friends, your colleagues, your kids, the parents of your kids in school, when you get to know them on a personal level and they get to know you, that is stronger than anything else we can do to bring down and combat Islamophobia. So I encourage you to really take on these resources, benefit from them, inshallah ta'ala, and use them and share them widely with your networks, inshallah ta'ala. And so with that, I'd like to transition to the final part of our program. And this is where I hope all of us can raise our hands up in collective prayer and dua. Before we begin, and I ask Sheikh Tariq to rejoin us, inshallah, he will be sharing the Arabic version of the du'as, and I will be reading the English, inshallah ta'ala. What I'd like to share with you is what is this dua that we're going to read a portion of. It is called Dua al-Nasiri by Imam Muhammad ibn Nasir al-Dar'i. And this prayer is otherwise known as the prayer of the oppressed, the sword of victory's lot over every tyranny and plot. This particular dua was written at a time when Morocco was being colonized by the French, and they had an incredible resistance towards this colonial force that was coming through. And Imam Nasiri wrote this dua, powerful, powerful dua for all those oppressed. And it was read in the mosques around Morocco and even in the kutab, which is basically where children, young kids learn Quran. And it was recited together in group, in unison, all throughout the country. And it's such a powerful prayer that the French president at the time outlawed the dua. He literally banned this prayer from being prayed in the masajid, in the mosques. They were terrified of it because the hadith of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, guard yourself against oppression and protect your souls from the cry of the oppressed. For surely there is no barrier between the cry of the oppressed and God. So we understand that when an oppressed person, whoever they may be, raises up their hands in any corner of the earth and prays to God, that dua, that prayer is answered. And we also know that the supplication is the true weapon of the believer, and that is what we are doing here collectively together. As I mentioned earlier, when there is a collective prayer with hands raised, hearts humbled, heads bowed, then inshallah ta'ala, that prayer gets accepted. So please put yourself in a point where you center yourself. Please ground yourself where you're sitting. Please shut off all devices and any other distractions. Please focus deeply on the meanings. Again, we'll have the Arabic and the English. And focus deeply on what's being said when you say Ameen directly from the heart. Because we don't know who amongst us Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will answer their prayers. We hope that somebody amongst us, our whole group here, that their heart is pure and it's sincere prayer that is directly accepted from our tongue straight to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I ask you, inshallah, to please ground yourself, remove all distractions, and remove all the clutter of thoughts and ideas and different, social media, whatever you may be doing, just move it all and spend the next 15 minutes or so with us, really focused on these prayers, inshallah ta'ala, for our sisters and brothers in Palestine and across the Ummah. Sheikh Tariq.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين يا من إلى رحمته المفر ومن إليه يلجأ المضطر ويا قريب العفو يا مولاه ويا مغيث كل من دعاه بك استغثنا يا مغيث الضعفاء فحسبنا يا رب أنت وكفى فلا أجل من عظيم قدرتك ولا أعز من عزيز سطوتك لعز ملكك الملوك تخضع تخفض قدر من تشاء وترفع والأمر كله إليك رده وبيديك حله وعقده وقد رفعنا أمرنا إليك وقد شكونا ضعفنا عليك فارحمنا يا من لا يزال عالما بضعفنا ولا يزال راحما انظر إلى ما مسنا من الورى فحالنا من بينهم كما ترى انظر إلى ما مسنا من الورى فحالنا من بينهم كما ترى قد قل جمعنا وقل وفرنا وانحط ما بين الجموع قدرنا، واستضعفون شكوة وشدة، واستنقصون عدة وعدة. فنحن يا من ملكه لا يسلب، لذنا بجاهك الذي لا يغلب. إليك يا غوث الفقير نستند، عليك يا كهف الضعيف نعتمد. أنت الذي ندعو لكشف الغامرات، أنت الذي نرجو لدفع الحسرات. أنت العناية أنت العناية التي لا نرتجي، حماية من غير بابها تجي. أنت الذي نسعى بباب فضله، أكرم من أغنى بفيض نيله. أنت الذي تهدي إذا ضللنا، أنت الذي تعفو إذا زللنا. وسعت كل ما خلقت علما، ورأفة ورحمة وحلما. وليس منا في الوجود أحقر، ولا لما عندك منا أفقر. يا واسع الإحسان يا من خيره عم الورى ولا ينادى غيره. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك عليه في الأولين وفي الآخرين وفي الملأ الأعلى إلى يوم الدين. اللهم إنا نسألك رضاك والجنة، ونعوذ بك من سخطك والنار. اللهم يا حي يا قيوم برحمتك نستغيث، أصلح لنا شأننا كله، ولا تكلنا إلى أنفسنا طرفة عين. حسبنا الله ونعم الوكيل، 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 حسبنا الله ونعم الوكيل. لا إله إلا أنت سبحانك إنا كنا من الظالمين. لا إله إلا أنت سبحانك إنا كنا من الظالمين. لا إله إلا أنت سبحانك إنا كنا من الظالمين. اللهم يا قاضي الحاجات، يا قاضي الحاجات، يا قاضي الحاجات، اقض حاجاتنا وحاجة المسلمين. اللهم ربنا هب لنا من أزواجنا وذرياتنا قرة أعين، واجعلنا للمتقين إماما. اللهم أعز الإسلام والمسلمين، وأذل الشرك والمشركين، ودمر أعداءك أعداء الدين. وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين.
الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى اللهم على الهادي محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم أجمعين. Thank you so much, Sheikh Tariq. Inshallah, we're going to read the English portion so that you're familiar with what Sheikh Tariq had shared. Inshallah, as I mentioned, this is the prayer of the oppressed, and we're going to read the first few pages, inshallah, which Sheikh Tariq covered. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of God, most merciful and most gracious. O you whose mercy is a refuge for all those in dire need who flee to you to lose their woes. O Master of reprieve, whose pardon is so near. You answer all in need. They know that you do hear. We beg for your relief, Redeemer of the weak. You are enough for us, both humbled and so meek. No strength can ever match your awesome majesty. No might can ever breach your just authority. The kings will bow like us to your great sovereignty. You choose whom you abase and raise decisively. Calamities we face are only stopped by you. It is in your hands they are dissolved within your view. For solace in these states we turn to you alone, complaining that we cannot make it on our own. Be merciful with us. You know our frailty. O you whose mercy falls like rain unceasingly, please look upon us now in all our misery. Our state as souls are oppressed, displayed so openly. Our numbers are reduced, our former wealth effaced, your once exalted rank and high repute abased. They think us without strength and they deem us without power. Our numbers in their eyes seem easy to devour. O you whose mighty kingdom never becomes less, we hope to take asylum in divine largesse, haven of the helpless. Upon you we depend, helper of the hapless. We trust in your godsend. You are the one we call, relieve our heavy loads, repel our life's travails, abolish what corrodes. Your protection only, your providence that's true. The door is yours alone, that everything comes through. You are the only one whose bounteous door we seek, most generous of givers. O Lord, you are unique. You bring us to the path should we all go astray and overlook our slips when we lose our way. All created things you hold in your embrace, with mercy and with light, the compass of your grace. Nothing in existence is able to compare with just how base we are in morality's affair. O infinite in beauty, whose endless good befalls the creatures you have made, so answer all of our calls. You alone save drowning souls, so gracious in their states, recusing the doomed, relieving our dire straits. Constriction is increasing, there is no cure in sight, so hasten to our need, respond to set them right. Our hands are raised to you, our palms are open wide. We seek sincerely endless grace you do provide. Be gentle with our souls in all that you've decreed. Bestow on us what pleases you in what we need. Replace our state of hardship with your gentle ease and guide us with your power's prevailing breeze. And place our status over those who took our lands. Constrain their evil now and tightly bind their hands. Overcome our foes with your subduing might. Unravel all their hopes and force them to take flight. Deter their evil aims and dash their unjust plan. Repel them from our gates and mystify each man. Be swift in justice, Lord, in this our anxious hour, for they cannot remove an atom of your power. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. O Allah, we ask you and we call upon you in all of your glorious names. We call upon you, Ya Allah, in all the names that you have named yourself. We call upon you in the names that we pray with them, inshallah, that you take, Ya Allah. Please listen to us now, Ya Allah. Listen to this dua. Please, Ya Allah, accept from us all that we have put forward here. Ya Allah, accept the efforts of each and every person who has come here today, seeking you, hoping and praying for ease for our sisters and brothers in Gaza. Ya Allah, for our sisters and brothers across the Ummah, all those who are in pain and in suffering. Ya Rabbi, shower your mercy down upon us, O most merciful. Listen, Ya Rabbi, to our du'as and accept them, Ya Kareem, O most generous. We ask you with sincerity, with humility, that you answer these prayers. Ya Rabbi, make us people who are learned and who help educate those around us. Make us people of action, who do upon what they have learned. Ya Rabbi, do not let us be people of hypocrisy, people who sympathize from afar. Ya Allah, make us people of empathy, who put ourselves in the shoes of our very fellow sisters and brothers and the children. Ya Rabbi, the children. Ya Allah, who have been bombed, who have lost their families. Ya Rabbi, who have lost their home and sense of security. Ya Rabbi, who have lost all sense of safety. Ya Rabbil Alameen, we ask you to please bring that sense of safety back to them, Ya Ilahi, Ya Rabb. Ya Rabbi, we ask you and we call upon you by your glorious names to see our sisters and brothers in Palestine right now, in Gaza and the West Bank. Ya Rabbi, see them through this trial. Ya Rabbi, we raise our hands for our sisters and brothers in Afghanistan who've recently passed away from the earthquake and all of their families. Ya Rabbi, in all the recent natural disasters in Turkey and Syria, in Libya and Morocco, Ya Rabbi, across the Muslim Ummah, we raise our hands and remember them. And we ask, Ya Rabbil Alameen, that we are people of charity, that we are people who don't just give with our finances, but we give with our time, with our energy, with our knowledge, and with our prayers. Ya Rabbi, make us steadfast in these last days. Ya Rabbi, make us steadfast on this straight track. Ya Rabbi, don't let us falter or fall from this track ever, ever, O generous one, Ya Kareem. Ya Rabbi, make us people of steadfast resolve. People, Ya Rabbi, who are clear on their intentions and clear in their work. Ya Rabbi, protect us and protect our ummah and protect this deen of Islam. Ya Rabbi, make us ennoble us, make us noble, Ya Rabbi, with carrying out the knowledge and the morals and the ethics of this beautiful deen. Ya Allah, we ask you, Ya Kareem, and call upon your glorious names to see us through and see our sisters and brothers in Palestine and across the Ummah in these difficult days. And Ya Rabbi, accept from us. We ask for Qubul. And Ya Rabbi, accept all those who've passed away and grant them the highest levels of Jannah. Ya Rabbi, with the Salihin and the Anbiya and the Shuhada and the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and gather us again, Ya Rabbi, on that last day. Gather us under the Ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam and take us straight to paradise, Ya Rabbil Alameen. And Ya Rabbi, we ask you that the last of our words be the best of them, and the last of our actions be the best of them, and the last of our days be the best of them. And we ask you, Ya Rabbi, husn al-khitam, the best of endings for us, our fellow sisters and brothers across the Ummah. And Ya Rabbi, all of those who've been here tonight, Ya Rabbi, bless the efforts of this organization, Maristan, and its mental health advocacy and work. Ya Rabbi, bless those who have put resources together, Dr. Hatim's work, Dr. Jasqa Nam's work, Sheikh Tariq's work, Sheikh Umar's work. Ya Rabbi, we ask you also to bless Brother Basim's work and all of the different organizations that they represent. Ya Rabbi, bless MSA National, all of our students. Ya Rabbi, bless all of those families and loved ones who have come here together to make this session a community session that is useful and beneficial. We pray, Ya Rabbi, that it brings healing and solace to many. Ya Rabbi, that it educates many, that it empowers many to take advocacy and steps forward, that Ya Rabbi, with this knowledge, that they're able to move forward with what pleases you and protect us from what does not. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Hamdan kathiran tayyiban mubarakan fi. And with that dua, we'll pray with Surah Al-Fatiha for acceptance of this dua. Please take a moment, everyone, and read Surah Al-Fatiha. Brothers and sisters, I thank our speakers today, and I thank the organization that has brought us here together, Maristan. We ask for your prayers. We ask, inshallah, that you continue to support us. I also want to send a special invitation to all of you that are here to continue to be part of our circles. Every month we have healing and learning circles that you can benefit from, that we hope that you continue to educate yourself and your family on mental health resources. Please do scan the QR code here to get more of those resources. And of course, we will email them all out to you, inshallah ta'ala. And also a reminder for those of you that are in the Bay Area, but also for those of you who aren't, we would very much love for you to join us in March. What are we doing in March? We have here in California at Stanford University in particular, we're hosting the annual Muslim Mental Health Conference. And with that hosting of the Muslim Mental Health Conference, we're also, which is the Muslim Mental Health and Islamic Psychology Lab is actually celebrating its 10th year anniversary. And we would love for all of you to be in support of that because of the resources that we create, alhamdulillah, and these community services. So please do plan to join us and register for that program once those links are up, and do plan to be with us in upcoming programs every month, inshallah, and let your family and friends know about all of these resources and programs, especially all of which were shared tonight. In the chat box, you'll see some of those resources again, and you'll also see our social media accounts, which are on the screen and in the chat box. We send out information regularly, almost daily, around mental health, Muslim mental health, and Islamic psychology resources, both the lab and our nonprofit partner, Maristan. We hope, inshallah ta'ala, all of this has been helpful to you all. And again, my deep appreciation and thanks for all of the speakers that were here and all of you for joining us. Barakallahu feekum. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. وصلى اللهم على الهادي محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم أجمعين. Take good care of yourselves, and inshallah we'll see you very soon again. Walhamdulillah. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.